together in conjunction with our colleagues from Clean Fuels Ohio and CALSTART. And I just want to give everybody a couple more minutes to log into the meeting. We are expecting maybe up to 100 people on the call, and right now we have half of those. So good morning, good afternoon, and we'll be on hold for a few minutes. Thank you.
Hello everyone, this is Ted Block-Rubin with CALSTART. Welcome to our electric vehicle workplace charging webinar. We're very happy so many of you could join us today for this effort, which is funded by an Implementation Initiative grant from the U.S. Department of Energy. I'd like to briefly go over the agenda and a few operational details for this webinar. Clean Fuels Ohio Director of Grant Administration, Cynthia Maves, will provide an overview of the Employer EV Workshop held in Ohio last April, the Workplace Charging Challenge program run by the Department of Energy, as well as a local case study and Clean Fuels Ohio resources and contacts for employers interested in PEVs and charging infrastructure. CALSTART Research Director Jasna will then describe the best practices for workplace charging, citing the Employer EV Initiative document of the same name that was published in September 2013. Best practices cover all aspects of installation and implementation of workplace charging. Topics include obtaining internal support, selecting an appropriate system with the associated costs, installing equipment, establishing internal procedures and payment, and identifying and recovering costs. Following the overview provided by Cynthia and Jasna, we will have presentations from 3 employer case studies who have successfully installed EV charging infrastructure at their workplaces. After each presentation, we will allow time for 3 questions from attendees. Throughout the webinar, please enter your questions in the question box of your GoToWebinar interface. Case studies will proceed as follows. Andrew Gilmore, CEO of BookFactory, a leading worldwide provider of custom build-to-order books, will present first. Tom Harrington, Commute Solutions Leader at Intuit, a global financial software company, will present second. And Grant Dowdy, Environment and Conservation Manager for the Transportation Demand Management Department of the Walt Disney Company, will present third. Following these presentations, Jasna will review additional employer incentives obtained from interviews with a handful of companies and summarized in the report, Internal Employer Policies and Incentives Encouraging Workplace Charging. A final Q&A period will complete the webinar, during which we will read and answer as many attendee questions as possible in the time remaining. We thank you all for attending this presentation. I'm now pleased to introduce Cynthia Maves.
Thank you, Ted. Could you go to the next slide, Ted? Clean Fuels Ohio is a statewide nonprofit focused on advanced fuels and efficient technologies. We are also a DOE-designated Clean Cities Coalition. The Drive Electric Ohio initiative was founded by Clean Fuels Ohio to promote the adoption of electric vehicles by Ohio consumers and fleets. We are the leading nonprofit in Ohio that focuses on promoting EVs. The Workplace Charging Initiative is a focus of the larger Drive Electric Ohio initiative. We also work to educate consumers and fleets. We host municipal workshops that offer guidance for local governments on how to get ready for EVs. In addition, we host EV safety training for first responders. This is a shot of our revamped Drive Electric Ohio website. Next slide.
Okay, Cynthia, this is Jasna. I'm just going to ask everybody to make sure they mute their phone. This is for our panelists. If your phone is not muted, better to try that. Thank you. Go on, Cynthia.
This is a shot of our workplace charging resource page on our Drive Electric Ohio website. You can access information here. You can notice the employer toolkit for workplace charging down in the right-hand corner in yellow. That has a link to many different resources that can be helpful to you. Next slide. In 2013, we published the Electric Vehicle Readiness Plan for Ohio. You may download it at driveelectricohio.org. It contains best practices, case studies, an infrastructure plan, and the economic impact analysis of EVs in Ohio. It also includes guidance on ADA compliance for charging station installation. Next slide. These slides were provided by Sarah Lexick at the DOE Workplace Charging Challenge. She wanted us to highlight the number of challenge partners, totaling 165 at this time. The U.S. DOE goal is to increase the number of employers offering charging tenfold by 2018. Next slide. Here's a snapshot of all of the Workplace Charging Challenge partners. Next slide. Clean Fuels Ohio and CALSTART are Workplace Charging Challenge ambassadors. And you can see here the number of workshops that the DOE has been involved in, hosted by ambassadors. Here's a listing of the DOE's Workplace Charging Challenge resources. I'd like to highlight the sample employee survey. We always recommend that the employers take a survey to gauge interest. It includes questions such as how far is your commute and what is your usual travel pattern. In addition, the DOE recently added the RFP guidance, which is helpful if you plan to issue an RFP for the equipment and or the installation. Also, check out the workplace charging etiquette sets drafted by Britta Gross at GM. Next slide. Clean Fuels Ohio hosted a workplace charging workshop back in April in 2014. CalSTART assisted with that and recruited panelists for that workshop. We presented our employer survey results from across Ohio. We also highlighted best practices and key lessons learned. We presented case studies, and we were able to identify primary barriers and needs of Ohio companies. We had more than 100 employers in attendance. Our panelists included GM, Disney, Google, First Energy, Cleveland Clinic, BookFactory, Melink, DOE, and CalSTART. Next slide. Melink Corporation was invited to participate in this webinar but could not attend, so I was going to present some of their information. They're a company located right outside of Cincinnati. Right now they have 10 level 1 charging stations and 3 level 2 charging stations. You can see they've got a solar canopy. One of those charging stations is located beneath the solar canopy. They encourage employee adoption by offering $5,000 incentives for vehicle purchase each year, and I believe that's on a first-come, first-served basis. Employees charge for free, and right now Melink has 7 employees that drive EVs and utilize the workplace charging. Next slide. This is a picture of Steve Melink charging up his Volt. You can see the quote there. His ultimate vision is to ring the entire parking lot with charging stations and have everyone driving PHEVs and EVs. Next slide. Clean Fuels Ohio can help employers with connecting you to resources. We can also meet with you to review best practices. We can connect you with EVSE vendors and installers. We can also organize employee ride and drive. You can see the photos in the slide. We hosted a ride and drive at Owens Corning. They had a fall festival back in September, and it included employees and their families, and we had about 50 people participate in the ride and drive. So workplace charging incentives. I get a call about once a week asking if there are any incentives in Ohio. Unfortunately, Ohio does not offer incentives right now for workplace charging or for EVSE infrastructure in general. We have heard that the Ohio Development Services Agency is getting ready to launch its alternative fuel transportation program. This is a program that has been on the legislative books for quite some time right now. We have heard that they have drafted the rules and that they're about to issue them. We've heard that it will be a preferred loan program and charging station installation will be eligible. In addition, Nissan offers workplace charging incentives, including charging station support, test drive opportunities, special employee pricing, and EV fleet purchase incentives. Next slide. Any questions?
Cynthia, this is Ted. I don't see any specific questions related to these materials right now. We have gotten a couple questions asking whether the presentation will be made available in the slides. The answer to that is yes. So hopefully everyone, that'll work for everybody. I think Jasna is going to present now.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to try and keep to our schedule here and leave enough room for all the questions and discussion at the end. What I wanted to cover is a review of best practices for workplace charging, just overall in this way how we've been developing tools and resources to help and encourage and assist in workplaces, companies, to adopt workplace charging. So very briefly, the agenda that I'll be covering is why workplace charging, why we think it's important, the best practices document and best practices that we've collected so far, share those out with you through these discussion of what the 6 elements of the best practices for workplace charging are, and then leave you all with a number of resources and tools that you can use afterwards by either taking them to your organization, to your leadership, to your state government, etc. So just briefly, a one-page CALSTART. We're a nonprofit organization, for those that don't know, working in advanced transportation technologies and fuels. We're headquartered here in Southern California in Pasadena, but we have offices in Colorado and a Northeast office in New York and another Northern California office. So we work throughout the country. Hence our collaboration and work with our colleagues in Ohio. Okay, jumping to the topic of plug-in electric vehicles, a overall. And workplace charging really in it by itself is only important as an encouraging tool to expand and grow the market of plug-in electric vehicles. And whoever has been following this, the trend of electric vehicles has seen a number of models just growing and growing in the market that are available for purchasing, for leasing, et cetera. So in that sense, workplace charging is important because it supports further deployment and market adoption of plug-in electric vehicles. A couple of things that are listed here provide reminders why workplace charging is considered actually a very important critical infrastructure location. It extends the range of plug-in electric vehicles while building the market. It allows for more electric miles from plug-in hybrids. It also creates, very interestingly, kind of a showroom for information sharing between the drivers and users. So in this way, it can also be used as an employee pool car for day trips. So we have examples of all of these at different workplaces. In order to support further growth, because workplace charging or EV charging infrastructure at workplaces was not a common thing a few years ago, we embarked in 2012 on developing a best practices document that really went through a series of steps. It was initiated back in July 2012 when we conducted the very first workshop at Google headquarters up in Mountain View on workplace charging. Following that successful workshop, we did a survey with a number of companies, conducted a series of webinars that were really peer-to-peer discussion of issues, did separate interviews of certain companies, and then reviewed relevant and important information in the literature. And we came up with the best practices document, which is the cover of which is shown here on this slide. So I want to, however, cover, because I know we're all busy, don't have time to read necessarily all of these, so I'm going to cover what the best practices contains. It really consists of 6 steps that describe what one needs to go through when installing workplace charging and how to go about it. Now, again, I'll try to briefly review them, but you can find more information on the website as well as in the document itself. So the first step then any company interested in workplace charging has to do is really gain internal support, which I think you will hear from our case studies following. It's important to have the discussion and conversation between the company management and the interested employees. And in companies where the dialogue discussion happens well is where we see workplace charging really being implemented in a more rapid fashion. This initial step then is followed by conducting, as Cynthia had mentioned, an employee survey and a site electrical system evaluation. Both are important. The employee survey will give you information on number of vehicles your employees are driving, the commuting distances, the interest to charge at work, and the electrical system evaluation is important to understand, what is the rating of your electrical panel, where are your circuit breakers, what they can stand, do they need to be upgraded, and what does the wiring overall look like? Because adding electric vehicle charging can, in some instances, actually burden the electrical load of your current system, you will have to examine that in detail. Once those first steps are completed, you need to kind of choose an appropriate system. And again, there are like 3 different things here. There are choices and options in the EVSE's hardware, level 1, level 2, fast charging, and how many EVSEs. Installation costs need to be taken into consideration, as well as operational costs, kind of forecasting or understanding what your costs will be in terms of electricity, what your network costs will be, and what the facility or demand charges may be once you add EVSEs. So choosing the system, this slide kind of provides the span of choices when you choose a system and access control. The EVSE purchase itself can vary from low cost to high cost, and I will leave this slide for you to look at, where the differences are from. The green side shows the lower cost, the blue side shows the higher cost, obviously. So installation, the purchasing of the EV equipment, the metering, and then operation and maintenance. And this slide was nicely created by my colleagues at the California Plug-in Electric Vehicle Collaborative. Following that is installing the system, which is another slide that I borrowed from my colleagues from the Plug-in Collaborative. And so in very clear steps, the installation goes from conducting the site assessment to pulling the necessary permits, to hiring contractors, et cetera. Finally, once you do have the system, it's also important to have some kind of established internal procedure, who will charge when, who will have priority, how you want to optimize the system, what payment options you want to include, whether it's free or a flat monthly charge or $1 per hour. In all of our reviews here, we don't suggest and recommend necessarily any. We just want to inform right now what the different options and choices are. And as you will find, for different situations and different size of companies, different systems are chosen. And then once the system is in place, there has to be somewhat of a plan also how to monitor, evaluate, and have future plans. So understanding usage and seeing if your users are satisfied, how much is being used, what the frequency is. And we'll hear in some of the case studies today some numbers from our speakers that give us info on this. Also then consider future plans about expansion, billing, et cetera, and continue to evaluate costs. So I want to cite a couple of tools and resources for workplace charging. We have created, as part of this grant that we got through Bay Area AQMD and from Department of Energy, we had created an evworkplace.org website. The little red picture on the side here shows what the website looks like. And if you go to this website, you will find the best practices document there, fully loaded. There's also another tool, which is a calculator to estimate costs of workplace charging. Please try it and use it and see how it works out for you. And it provides basically estimate of what it could, what the cost would be for a certain place. And finally, employee incentives and policies, which is a separate document we're just completing right now as part of this grant. Other tools and resources are available on the California Plug-in Vehicle Collaborative website also. And so the best practices, again, is the document I just went through. The Amping Up California Workplaces is a really nice case study sample of 20 different samples, case studies in the state of California. And they provide you the stories from each one of these case studies and some stats and numbers and some quotes. So we'd like to refer people to take a look at those. The Plug-in Vehicle Collaborative also has a 4 decision guides. These are very short documents that kind of explain why, how, and what in 2 or 3 pages. And great primers really on workplace charging, very suitable for distribution. So please take a look at those. And this is the slide that Cynthia already had shown. The U.S. Department of Energy Workplace Charging Challenge has been compiling all of these different tools at one location. Lots of good tools are available there, and I encourage everybody to go and check them out. And so at the end, I just wanted to acknowledge funding for this work here provided by U.S. Department of Energy, through the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, who was the main prime for the California piece of work, And then we had assistance or collaboration on this side here from the Plug-in Electric Vehicle Collaborative and the South Coast AKMD as well. All right, so with that, I think Ted is going to take us to the next presentation.
So we're going to begin the case studies review. Our first presenter is BookFactory with Andrew Gilmore. So Andrew, if you'd like to unmute yourself, and we'll begin with your presentation.
All right, great. Hi, I'm Andrew Gilmore, and I'm one of the founders of BookFactory. I started the company out of my basement 12 years ago, and now we have 20,000 square feet of manufacturing space, 27 employees, and we sell to most of the Fortune 500. And what we make is books that you write in for documenting intellectual property, documenting regulatory compliance, and we are very proud that we have been making custom books for Tesla since 2004, and we also make custom laboratory notebooks for SpaceX as well. So next slide. We're part of the Workplace Charging Challenge. We're a partner, and we have been for some time. And Workplace Charging Challenge came around the same time as a local initiative called Dayton Regional Green 3. So we completely looked at all of our operations from a green standpoint and looked at the things that we can do to make the place more efficient, including replacing all the lighting. And once we became certified as the Dayton Regional Green 3 partner, we received lower electricity rates, we got a discount on our lighting upgrades, and we also got all kinds of things that would help us in the energy sector. Next slide. We were recently awarded as a Leading the Charge award from the U.S. Department of Energy, and less than 20% of the challenge partners are awarded that. So we're very proud to be in this group of people. For example, Capital One, Chrysler, General Motors, Google, and there we are, BookFactory, a 27-person organization. So we're very proud of that. Next. Now, this is what workplace charging looks like from a small business perspective. So what we did is our first electric vehicle was the one on the left, which is an employee that has a plug-in Prius. And so we took a look at what we could do for that person, and it's simple as having them plug into a 110 outlet inside this drive-in dock door. We have dock doors for semis, but this particular door, we had a 110 outlet in there, and then all of a sudden it's workplace charging. Then we had other employees that were buying EVs, and right now we have a plug-in Prius, we have a Tesla Model S, and we have a Nissan Leaf, and we have another employee that as soon as the 2016 or 2017 Volt comes out this summer, is going to purchase a Volt. So our 27 employees to have 4 EVs is a pretty high adoption rate. What we have is we have a Clipper Creek level 2 on the left, and we hook that into an existing 220 outlet. So that was a very simple installation, very inexpensive. Total into that level 2 charger is right about, I think we were about $1,200 into that. Then we also have a level 3 charger, which is 80 amps, and that's a Tesla high-power wall connector. That will charge at a rate of 62 miles per hour, and the unit itself costs a little over $1,000, or less than that now, and we did have to pay an electrician to put that in. So that particular level 3 charger, we're in it for probably $1,200 as well. And I will make the point, both of these chargers are open to the public. And so we are on what's called PlugShare. Next slide. So this is what a map of Dayton, Ohio looks like. And you can see the green dots, and those are all EV charging stations that are available to people. Now, I'd like to caution you, when you go to PlugShare and take a look at your particular geographic area, a lot of these charging stations are in car dealerships. And whether or not you can charge there is not up to Nissan, it's not up to GM, it's up to the individual dealerships. So there are many dealerships that will not allow you to charge unless you purchased your car there. I went to, the person that's going to buy the Volt, I went to a test drive with them for a BMW i3. And they told me that only BMW i3s purchased at that dealership can charge at that charger. And I said, well, you can certainly tell your BMW i3 owners that they can come and charge at my location anytime they want. Next. Okay, this is a diagram that I've got that shows you the effective driving range of a Volt on EV mode only if you have to drive to and from work on one charge. And the assumption is you get the rated mileage, but you arrive home not with 0, but at least 10 miles. Now, if you talk to a Volt owner, most Volt owners do not want that engine to come on. They love the EV experience. So if you click the mouse, that is the effective range if you have workplace charging. So what this shows is that I have a higher recruiting area if I provide workplace charging. So a Volt owner, I can go out to almost Springfield, Ohio, and recruit a Volt owner, and they can drive to work, charge up, go run errands at lunch, come back, charge up, and go home without ever having the engine come on, the internal combustion engine. Next slide. This is what a Leaf and a BMW i3 look like, which have the same effective range. So you can see how far my recruiting area is if I don't have workplace charging. And then next mouse click. This is what it looks like with workplace charging. So I can almost go all the way to Columbus, Ohio. Somebody can drive to work, and these are pure EVs, unless you get the backup engine on the i3. But from a pure EV perspective, I can recruit these people, and they can come to work, charge, and again, go out to lunch, come back, charge up again. They will leave work with a full charge. Now, the reason I don't have a circle for the Tesla, of course, is because with either 240 miles or 300 miles, it's really not a factor for the Teslas. Plus, we have about 12 miles from our location, there are 8 Tesla superchargers. I do have, coming by here, I used to have several Tesla owners that would pop in and get an 80 amp charge prior to heading north to a supercharger, but now that we have the superchargers, I don't get a lot of Tesla owners charging up. But I will tell the story that there was a professor that was being recruited for the University of Dayton that is 2 miles from our location. And they saw us on PlugShare, and he called and talked to me, and he said he's considering taking the job, but his condo doesn't have charging. And could he charge at our location? I said, yes. So that University of Dayton professor charged at our station for about 3 months until the University of Dayton built chargers. So I was the workplace charging area for the University of Dayton for 3 months. Next slide. So implementation considerations, especially from a small business perspective. You know, understand your rationale for implementing workplace charging. Why are you doing this? What if you have nobody, especially in a small business, that has an EV? Well, if EVs are coming and you want to recruit people that will have the ability to buy EVs, it's very simple to install it, and also you can open it up to the public or you can keep it private. But at least you'll have that there, and you can start with a level 1 charging station for less than $50, and I'll explain how in a minute. Next. Here's your options. Level 1, which is a 120 volt outlet, but you'll notice right next to it is an outlet with an additional prong to the left. And EV drivers understand this because the left-hand plug is you can only pull 12 amps. The right-hand plug, you can pull 16. So you'll get a little benefit in faster charging with a 20 amp circuit than you will a 16 amp circuit. So if you wanted to start out very simply, and this is very easy to do, you walk around your building and see where the plugs are. You find a plug, you take an EV charging sign, put that up, and then you paint green lines, and all of a sudden you've got a charging station. Put it on PlugShare. So at least people that may be applying for jobs at your location know that you support workplace charging, and especially if you have a Volt, even if you happen to have a plug-in Prius or a Nissan Leaf, charging all day on a 12-volt circuit will at least give you some mileage before you head home. Then the next level up is a level 2, so that's a 220 amp circuit, 220 volt circuit, 30 amps. And then you go to level 3, which is 220 volts up to 80 amps, sometimes 100 amps. So those are the levels, the options that you have. And then, of course, there's fast charging, but not necessarily at the workplace. Next. Operating costs, and I get this question all the time. The city of Dayton, when they put in their 2 level 2 chargers in their city garage, asked me to come over, test them out, and they were asking me about charging, and I said, it's really not worth tracking. It's really not worth paying for the extra infrastructure to try to charge people for it, plus especially since you're charging them in the park anyway. So I ran the numbers based on our electric rates here, and so for a Volt at 0 to charge fully charged, it's about $1.11. For a Leaf and an i3, it's about $1.80. For a Tesla, you never have a Tesla come in close to 0. But if a Tesla was at half battery pack, go all the way to the top, you'd be at about $2.95. And so we don't track it. To me, it's not worth tracking, and the employees just love it. And I think it's also gotten us a lot of good press in the community that we support not only Dayton Regional Green 3, but workplace charging. Next. You have to decide whether it's employee only or open to the public. Next. And my biggest advice as a small business owner, and I spent 26 years in the Air Force, so I know what it's like to work for a big organization, is don't overthink it. You know, you can start out small and get bigger. We went back and forth whether to make it employee only or open to the public. And open to the public, it's really kind of interesting because people will call ahead and they'll say, hey, I've got a Nissan Leaf. I really need a level 2 charge. Is it okay? And we'll go out there and talk to them and say, hey, glad you're in the area. It's kind of like a community thing, especially since we're right off an exit on I-75. Next. And that's it from BookFactory.
Hi, everyone. This is Ted again. If you'd like to type in any questions you might have for Andrew now, I think we're going to read one here from Felicia Williams, and Jasna might have a comment, Andrew as well. So her question is, what are the best practices in fees to prevent high fees that discourage employees from using chargers? Also using kilowatt hours instead of hourly pricing to treat plug-in hybrid and all EVs fairly.
Yeah, so I am actually going to pause a little bit on that question because I think our presenters that are coming up may have some numbers on that and discussion on costs, et cetera. So let's see after Intuit and Disney present their case studies if that has been addressed or not, and we'll come back to it. But thank you for asking that.
Andrew, you have a couple questions here. The first one is from Chris Poley. Because you are allowing anyone to use your chargers via PlugShare, did you find that your electric bill dramatically increased overall? Could you estimate the annual cost?
No, we really haven't noticed any increase based on the employee charging or the people off the street charging. That particular bay is also the bay where we run our presses. So we're pulling a lot of juice in that bay, and we're paying over $1,200 a month just in electric costs. So it fluctuates all the time in that bay based on the workload and what we're printing at any given time, and so we really don't track it. But As far as the public coming, we maybe get 2 people a week, and they'll stay for a couple of hours. It used to be, especially before the Tesla superchargers, I would get calls from people, Tesla owners, that were coming through on the weekend, and we would leave the charging cable outside. So, you know, those people maybe pulled $2 worth of electricity.
Thanks, Andrew. I think there's the next question that came in here was from Raymond Chow. You sort of addressed it here, but it's how do your employers feel about the chargers being open to the public? And somewhat of a related question, what happens if they're plugged in and someone from the public would like to charge, or vice versa?
Well, our policy, and this will sound counterintuitive, and we've got this on PlugShare, if someone comes off the highway and needs a charge, we will unplug for them. And our employees know that, and we haven't had a problem yet, because we've got both level 2 and level 3. The Tesla charging at 62 miles per hour on a level 3, they're done in like an hour and a half to 2 hours. And the same way with the plug-in Prius, the Leaf takes a little bit longer, but we've always got something open. And by the way, yeah, I mentioned about, I forgot to follow through on that, about how easy it is to have a level 1 charging station once you find the outside plug. You get the sign for roughly $30. You can order them online, and then you paint the green lines. And if you look back in that picture at the green lines behind the building, my son and I painted those on the weekend.
And just a quick point here, there was a question regarding what your per kilowatt hour rate for electricity is in your area. Do you have that off the top of your head?
Yes, the official published rates are 7.5 per kilowatt hour, but it doesn't include all the delivery charges and all that on top of it. So if you add up all the charges on a bill divided by the kilowatt hours used, it's about 12.2.
Great, thanks. I think we're going to move on now to Tom Harrington from Intuit. So Tom, if you'd like to unmute yourself, we'll begin with your presentation.
Well, thanks, Ted. And that was some great stuff, Andrew. Really motivating. If you want to move on to the next one, Intuit is a financial leader of business financial management and personal financial management solutions. We've been around for about 30 years now. We're about a $4.5 billion company. We've got about 80,000 employees globally at 32 offices across about 10 different countries. We have about 60 million customers. And if you want to move on to the next one. So when we got ready to look at our EV infrastructure, we knew we needed to expand. We had a small amount of chargers in Mountain View, Menlo Park, San Diego, and Woodland Hills, and we realized it was time for us to expand outside of California, as well as expand our operations within California. So one of the first things that we did was we kind of looked at it and said, okay, so if we're going to go ahead and do this, a common question at Intuit whenever you embark on something is to define what you're solving for. So for us, we decided that there were really 3 things we were solving for in our expansion. We were solving for the employees, we were solving for the community and the environment, and then we were also solving for talent attraction and retention. And I think when you take all 3 of those together, there was a great case for change, and fortunately our leadership understood that, and they were willing to invest what I would consider to be a substantial amount of money into our infrastructure. Ted, if you want to go on to the next one. So this was a real powerful slide that we actually used to motivate our workplace leadership team. What we tried to do is we tried to put together a slide that shows what the EV infrastructure looks like to an employee and what it should look like to the workplace leadership team, as well as showing the expected growth that we expected to see in our population over the next 7 years. Now, granted, this deck was prepared in February of last year, and we actually did our infrastructure expansion in the late summer, just in time for us for our next fiscal year to go through. So we had some learnings on this. the numbers that you see here in terms of the expected population really aren't too far off in terms of where we're at today. If you look at Intuit's employee structure, we've got a lot of young, affluent professionals that are working here. So they like the idea of something hip and something that gives back to the environment, and EVs are just right in that ballpark. Ted, you want to go on the next one? Okay, this is an eye chart, and this is what we really use to sell our management in terms of where we wanted to expand. So we did all kinds of crazy things. We looked at what the registrations were in a particular area with the Department of Motor Vehicles. We looked at the forecast for what the growth was going to be in terms of electric vehicle sales. We looked at what appeared to be our existing EV population. You see that column, probably about the fifth column in, says minimum EV today. What that was back in February. Now, since then, we've actually expanded over and above the 20 new chargers that we had proposed here. So today we're actually at 79 ports and 252 registered drivers as of yesterday. And you compare that to that column over there, column 5, and it's about 4 times the amount. And you may ask, well, what happened and why do we have such significant growth? Well, besides setting up the expanded infrastructure for charging our EVs, we also made a change on August 1st where we had been charging $1.50 per hour to charge your electric vehicles, and that is $1.50 per connection hour. In August of 2014, we switched over to free charging. So we saw a significant amount of growth when we switched over to free charging. And Ted, if you want to go on to the next one. So we had a lot of lessons that we learned along the way. The really good news for us is that our leaders really understood the need to expand our EV infrastructure. So they understood that it was going to need to be a significant amount of expansion and a significant amount of cost to be able to expand. They also understood that if you ran straight per capita numbers, we were going to fall way short of what our adoptions rate were going to be for our existing workers. One of the really cool things that ended up happening is our partners reporting. We went with a single partner after a fairly large let me spell that out, sorry. Acronyms go crazy here at Intuit. I'm sure they do other places, but let me spell things out for you. We did a request for information first to see all of the different types of chargers that were out in the field and what some of the attributes were. Then we narrowed it down and did an actual request for quotation for the actual chargers themselves that we wanted to install, as well as the installation that was there. And one of the great things about the partner that we went with is we found that the reporting that's available without doing any sort of customization to it, just taking what's available right out of the right off the shelf, we're able to sell additional investments. That's the reason why you saw us go from 63 ports to 79 in the course of 6 months here in 2015 right now, our fiscal year 2015. We were able to show that we had demand that was basically knocking on the capacity levels of the systems we had at one of the sites. So we immediately expanded in that area, and we're actually considering expanding in yet another one of the sites that we expanded to. By the way, we do have sites outside of California. We have 2 sites in Reno. We have 2 dual-port chargers in Tucson, 2 in Plano, and 2 in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Let's see. I guess on the bad side here, one of the things that we decided was, from a workplace standpoint, we were not going to invest in managing the EV chargers. So we were saying, okay, we're going to put the infrastructure there, and we'll give you a set of guiding principles to work on. But bottom line is, if there's a demand issue, we're expecting you to actually work through it. And in a few moments, I'll actually pull up the guiding principle slide that we use to go through here. I guess the big thing here is, even though we said we weren't going to manage the systems, there is an expectation of management. And then I guess the next thing we'll go through is we'll go through the guiding principles. So Ted, if you want to go on to the next slide. Okay, so you may want to focus on the left-hand side of this chart. It's a bit of an eye chart here, but there really are three main principles over here on the left-hand side that we're really focused on. Principles 3, 5, and 7 are the three that really cause the most churn in our environment. There's an expectation that we will make additional chargers available. There's an expectation that we will manage the systems. And then finally, there's an expectation that the chargers are a right and not an amenity. And we run into a little bit of a problem trying to manage that out. One of the things that I had some difficulty with is, even though this is up on our web pages, this is up in some of our shared mail lists that we have for our EV owners, it's been sent out to them when we announced the changes in pricing. Folks still aren't reading this. So one of the things that we're actually doing later on this week is we're actually posting a set of these guiding principles to each one of our EV stalls that we have across the campus. So Ted, I think if you want to move on to the next one, and I think that might have been my last one here, so I'll open things up for questions.
Great. Thanks, Tom. So I think one of the questions that was asked in a few different ways here talks about the difference between an internal combustion and EV charging. So the question here is, do any of the employees or employers have an issue with equity? And how is this handled, whether through human resources or separately, if you want to...
Yeah, so it's interesting. There actually are kind of two classes. There's a class that's the pure plug-in, and there's a class that's the plug-in hybrid. And there's often comments that say, well, you know, that both doesn't really need access to that charger. And bottom line, we point back to the guiding principles and say, hey, you guys need to work this out. You guys need to figure it out. We do use a lot of mailing lists, and people are really great about jockeying their vehicles around. Ideally, though, we hope to have enough supply of chargers that they wouldn't need to be jockeying their vehicles around. Really funny story about what we had going on in San Diego. As part of the EV project, we had installed 3 level 2 chargers with a single port way back when eco-tality was first getting started. And we had been managing 11 different EVs on those 3 chargers that we had, 3 single port chargers in San Diego. So these folks had figured ways to manage their demand and manage the supply so that they had a good mix. But these were the first guys that we wanted to make sure that we rewarded with additional chargers. And these guys absolutely love what we've got down there right now.
Great. And have you seen anything between the traditional gas drivers and the EVs, whether there's any, I don't know if jealousy is the right word, but if they've had any complaints about the free fuel, as it were, in the last few months?
Yeah, you know, it's kind of interesting. We have not run into that whatsoever. When we initially were, I mentioned that we used to charge for our EV charging, and that created a lot of pushback. And we would liken that and say, well, you know, we're not paying for the fuel that's in a combustion engine on a vehicle for folks to get here and back. So why should we pick up the charging on the EV vehicles? And we realized that was a bit short-sighted because, number one, the EVs are much cleaner for the environment and they're better. And number two, it's a talent attraction. It means that we've got a bigger, as Andrew went through, we've got a bigger base of talent that we could draw off of, basically doubling the talent base for electric vehicles. So I think Andrew hit it right on the head on that in terms of that being out there. But no, I don't think we're running into any more instances regarding the free fuel or cheap fuel that we've been running in lately.
Okay, thank you. And we had one more question which asks whether the free charging is considered a taxable benefit.
So, you know, it's funny, it's not, because I was actually on a bandwagon for quite a while on that one. Initially, it was a bit of a gray area, and the IRS has actually come out with a finding that actually says that workplace charging is not to be considered a benefit because it's so small in value. One of the other questions, too, that came up for Andrew that is a little bit interesting, someone asked earlier about if there was consideration for charging by the kilowatt hour instead of charging by the hour. In California, up until I think it was last year, it was illegal for anyone other than the utility to charge electricity by the kilowatt hour. And there was a new law passed in California, I think it was around June of last year, that opened that up too as well. So if we wanted to today, we actually could charge by the kilowatt hour too as well. But as a direct answer to your question, no, it's not a taxable benefit, and the IRS actually has issued a ruling on that.
Great. Thanks, Tom. I think any further questions we'll try to address at the very end. And we'll move on to Grant Doughty from the Walt Disney Company. So, Grant, if you want to unmute yourself, we'll begin your presentation.
Thank you very much. So I've heard a couple of presentations. Great stuff, both of you. And it's interesting that you're both offering free charging. We kind of took the opposite path, and I didn't put this in my presentation, but I'll just go ahead and tell the story here. The first effort that we had at charging was at Disneyland Resort in the Team Disney Parking Garage for employees. We had just a row of 5 level 1 regular 120-volt plugs, and we put them in kind of before EVs were sort of getting popular. And the first month, we occasionally see one car parked in those 5 spaces, and we thought, okay, this is fine. It's going to last for a while. The second month, we started seeing like a second car show up there every once in a while. And then by the time we got to month 4, all 5 of those spaces were full every day. And we had complaints from drivers that were looking to purchase an EV or lease an EV and didn't want to because we didn't have the capacity or the space for them. So that was kind of the impetus for us sort of considering how we're going to address workplace charging. So let's go to the first slide, and we'll get into the rest of this. We opened our first stations that were level 2s in October of 2013. That was at our Burbank facility, which is our studio location where we put all the movies together. We have our ABC building there as well. We have 46 spaces in LA County, 32 in Burbank on that studio campus, 10 in Glendale, which is our Imagineering and Consumer Products groups, as well as a few other smaller business units, and 4 at a place called Prospect Studios, tucked into a corner of Hollywood. At Disneyland Resort, we have 10 cast member spaces, and those are constantly full now. We're looking at some pricing strategies there that I'll get into in a few minutes. We also have 20 guest spaces at Disneyland Resort, and those have proven to be very popular. So if you are coming to California for a visit and you want to bring your electric car to Disneyland Resort, you do have a place to park it and plug in. So we have 76 charging spaces available now. All of them are on the ChargePoint network. Let's go to the next slide. So back when we started in October of 2013, we set it up so that ChargePoint was our provider. There is a one-time sign-up to be able to see the Disney network on ChargePoint.com. We did not want these spaces to be public, unlike some of our previous presenters, because these are private employee garages. We didn't want drivers just seeing these on the ChargePoint map and coming up to our security officers all the time asking to be let in to be charging. So we just set it up so that there's one little extra hoop to jump through. You have to put in a password to access the network, and then you can see the chargers if you're an employee. The original fee that we set up was on the high end of the spectrum. remember the original setup was at our studio in Burbank, and the way our infrastructure, our org chart is, I work for the Transportation Demand Management team, so I'm kind of an advocate. I don't have funding for the installation of the chargers specifically allocated to my budget. That's kind of up to the facilities teams at the respective locations. So we have a facilities group in Burbank and a facilities group in Anaheim that we had to kind of lobby for this effort. And so it's their money. We're trying to convince them to spend their money basically to install these stations. And there were two different tacks that these different facilities groups took. The one in Burbank was concerned about having to put in charging stations in perpetuity to kind of meet demand. So their thinking was, let's put these in, but let's set the price on the high side so that we kind of discourage it so that people that really need to plug in have access to it. And so we set the station price at first at $1.75 per hour. We did have a penalty rate so that if someone was parked there for a long period of time, someone else could use the space in the afternoon. It doubled the price basically if you were there longer than 3 hours. Most drivers were happy to have a plug-in option, but were kind of complaining about the price. So we set an agreement with the facilities team to kind of review the usage reports and adjust pricing up or down every few months, kind of as the usage and the comments from the drivers warranted. We did do a driver survey before all of this started and kind of gauged the pricing that we felt drivers would pay from their comments, and we knew this was going to be on the high side, and as it turned out, our usage initially was relatively low. Let's go to the next slide. So Disneyland Resort brought their chargers online in January 2014, so we'd had a few months of experience at the studio under our belt. And in talking with the facilities team at Disneyland, their thinking was, we want to come into this with the idea that the investment that they were making, which was fairly significant, they wanted to kind of at least come close to breaking even on that investment. The executive thinking here was, budgets are typically pretty important. At the studio, they didn't really care about the break-even part. They just wanted to provide something for employees that were making a lot of noise. But at Disneyland, breaking even was important. So we did a pretty careful study of the fees here. We came into this with a different tack. We decided to charge for the energy as opposed to the hour, the hourly rate. So we set the pricing at 28 cents per kilowatt hour and 35 cents per kilowatt hour for guests. Typically, whenever anything happens here at Disneyland, the guest fees are a little bit more expensive than the employee fees. Employees do enjoy some backstage discounts. So that was kind of the thinking when we set up those two pricing rates. We have 100 cast members now registered for 10 available spaces, and the capacity, as I mentioned, is reached almost daily. So we're actually considering implementing some sort of a penalty fee. I mentioned before at the studio we have that penalty rate that kicks in now in hour 5. It was in hour 4. At Disneyland, because we have cast members using these spaces that are kind of on the front lines in the park, it's difficult for them to come out and move their car when it's done charging. So we don't have a penalty rate. And so we're seeing a big difference in the average time a car is parked and plugged in. It's about 8 to 10 hours here at Disneyland versus 3 hours or so up at the studio. So for a while, we had these two different pricing strategies in place, the 28 cents per kilowatt hour here at Disneyland and the $1.75 per hour up at the studio. And we were still hearing from a lot of the studio drivers complaints about that being fairly expensive. So we kind of put together a comparison of the two after we had a few months of experience with both. And based on the charge point reporting, we evaluated and decided to adjust the studio to a energy charge. So we now charge up there 31 cents per kilowatt hour. They set it a little bit higher because they still want to discourage people from switching to workplace charging from home charging as their primary conduit for their power. But it's inexpensive enough that those who need it can plug in, and there's plenty of space available based on the number of spaces that we have up at the studio. And we did amend the penalty rate. We lowered it a little bit to $2.50 an hour, starting with the 5th hour being plugged in. And so far, it's been very well received. That price change was, initially there was some concern about it for some cars being a little more expensive, but we really analyzed the actual charging rate of the Leafs and decided that the rate that they're actually charging was not the 6.6 kilowatts that they typically boast in the manual, but it was closer to something like 5.8 or 5.9 kilowatts. So with that, the calculation was that they were paying about the same rate as they did prior to the price change. So everybody realized that some people were benefiting that had the slower cars, and the Leafs were not paying any more than they were before. So everybody ended up actually being pretty happy with our analysis of that. At the studio and in Burbank and in Glendale, we have 325 drivers registered, competing for 46 available spaces. That's actually been plenty. The 46 seems to be more than the number that we actually need right now, but we're anticipating, of course, over the next few years that usage will continue to increase. Shall we go to the next slide? Just so that everybody is aware, we also have a couple of incentives for EV drivers who are maybe considering acquiring either a plug-in or a straight EV. It's $1 per day here in Southern California, and they get that just by reporting to us each day that they drove their car. It's kind of an honor system thing. It helps a little bit to offset the cost of their energy because we are charging for their power, a little bit of a fee. So it's kind of a nice thing to give back at least a portion of that. But we did feel like we needed to charge just to kind of control the supply and demand equation to make sure that there were empty spaces when drivers needed to plug in. And then we also have our Partners Federal Credit Union offering a small discount on new EV loans, whether it's a plug-in or a 100% EV. They get a 0.25%, a quarter of a percent off of the rate of a new car loan, which can be $10 or $15 a month in difference in what they're paying on a monthly car payment. Next slide. So here's a few stats. I'm sure that everybody's curious about the cost. For us, I don't have the whole picture because I don't have the facilities budget at my fingertips, but I do know that both facilities teams combined have spent well into six figures for the entire system. The average cost is about $9,000 or so per port. That includes all the hardware, software, networking, electrical infrastructure, signage, and striping, and everything that goes into analyzing the cost. Some were less, of course, if they were in a garage that had a relatively newer power infrastructure. Unfortunately, some of our garages are older and did not have the infrastructure kind of readily available, and we had to do a lot of significant infrastructure work before the actual station installations. We have 425 total drivers registered as of yesterday, which works out to about 7.6 drivers per available plug. And I happened to be in a conference in Washington, D.C. a couple weeks ago and spoke to the gentleman from UC Davis who actually had done a study very specific to what the ideal number of charging stations was. The study is called Charging for Charging, and if you look up the UC Davis publications and that title, you probably will find it if you're curious. But his study suggested one plug for every 10 drivers if we had a capacity of 2 sessions per station per day. And so based on that, we have probably more stations than we need up in Burbank and Glendale, and not enough stations currently in Anaheim. We're working at maybe making some increases to our numbers here in Anaheim with the next fiscal year kicking in. So we're averaging about 74 charging sessions per day at the 56 available employee spaces, which works out to about 1.32 sessions per employee plug Monday through Friday. Next slide. I wanted to kind of show you the growth pattern here. So this is 2014 from January through December. This is our Burbank and Glendale combined statistics showing the unique drivers that plugged in during the course of any given month. The peak in October and December shows that we have 177 unique drivers plugging in. Out of the 325 total registered drivers, that means about half of them are using the chargers relatively consistently in the course of any given month. So I thought that was an interesting stat. In May of 2014 is when we made the change from the hourly to the per unit of energy charge. And you can see from that point the usage has only just kicked up and increased. We had a lot of drivers prior to May, who were a little unhappy with the hourly rate and weren't plugging in just because they perceived it to be too expensive. But you can see that May, June, July, we had some immediate growth just based on existing EV drivers that now were okay with plugging in at the lower rate. And then the rest of the growth I attribute just to the fact that we have new drivers coming online to seek registration every single week. So the sales and the leases of EVs are still going strong out there as far as my experience has seen. Next slide. And this is Disneyland Resort. I wanted to show you the guest page just for kicks. We installed the stations in the middle of January and didn't really publicize them until February, but you can see in January it looks like a few enterprising drivers had actually found them somehow. But starting in February, we didn't really put the word out too much in the EV community. They were listed on PlugShare, the site that I don't know if it was Tom or Andrew that mentioned that. I think it was Andrew, but once it hit PlugShare, it took off almost immediately. You can see the March numbers. People were really finding out about it and using it, posting about it. And through December, you can see we had generally sort of an upward trend. There are 2,531 guests that have plugged in at one time during the course of 2014. Those are unique drivers, some of them certainly multiple times. We have a lot of annual pass holders. But I was surprised when I looked that number up for this presentation because I was expecting it to be maybe in the hundreds. But more than 2,500 people have come to Disneyland in an EV. That surprised me. Next slide. And this is our cast member or employee page for that same kind of stat for the 10 employee chargers that we have. And you can see, again, January is kind of a slow month because we just had installed the chargers in the middle of that month. But almost immediately, because we had the experience already with some of the level 1 chargers that had been free, people were aware of the fact that we had charging and almost immediately started using them. And you can see that we still have increases. We have 50 to 55 unique users in any given month at our peak, and that number, again, is only increasing. So, next slide. I wanted to mention a couple quick things before I open it up for questions. I don't know if anybody has seen it yet. I just came across it early this morning, but BMW has put out their Super Bowl commercial for the year. Brian Gumbel and Katie Couric are pitching the i3, and it's very clever the way that they put it together. So if you haven't seen that, just maybe go to YouTube and Google either Brian Gumbel or Katie Couric commercial or BMW i3, and I'm sure you'll find it. I saw it this morning. It's very clever. I'm sure it'll be on during the broadcast of the game, but check that out. And the other interesting thing I wanted to mention, too, in hearing the other stories about how internal support was gained in terms of getting the decision to put in charging, we had been kind of chipping away at it for a long time. We got those free plugs in for a while, and we're able to kind of demonstrate, yeah, okay, finally here's a bit of a need, and drivers are actually starting to verbalize their desire for it. But it didn't really happen for us until Disney acquired Marvel. And Marvel had a location out in Manhattan Beach in California, and when we acquired them, we decided to move all of their team over to the studio in Burbank into some empty space that we had. And it was a desire of the very highest levels at Marvel that their EV drivers should have access to EV stations. And it wasn't until that happened that truly the executive buy-in was accomplished, because up until that point it was kind of like, well, we don't really need to spend the money. We don't really know how much they're going to be used. But when the Marvel team wanted them in, that was when that was kind of what turned the corner for us. So I just thought that was an interesting story to share. It is important to have executive champions for any of this to happen. Yeah. And with that, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Yes, Brent, thank you, and thank you for bringing that up. It is true that it is important to have champions at the highest level. We do have a couple of questions here relevant to what you were presenting. How much are the costs of EVSE communication and charging, both direct and indirect, and how do those costs go up when managing and charging fees for the stations? Or how much do the costs go up when you manage the charging fees for stations?
So the costs are basically just our initial investment in the infrastructure. We hadn't really factored in the cost of electricity. We do have commercial rates in Anaheim, and we actually have separate utility companies in Burbank and Glendale. So the rates vary a little bit, but they're generally around 11 cents per kilowatt hour. It's kind of a non-factor. We didn't really factor the electrical price in that heavily when we were trying to price these. Really the main decision in terms of what to charge our employees was just based on supply and demand. We wanted to control the usage of the spaces so that we'd always have a space open whenever an EV driver is looking for and needs to plug in. So really the main concern wasn't how much is it relative to the electrical cost or the infrastructure cost. It was just, how do we ensure that these spaces stay open and we don't have to install any more of these? In Burbank, I mentioned their facilities team really didn't have the cost in mind. They just wanted to ensure that in the garages where we couldn't put any more stations because of electrical capacity, that we didn't have to try to meet future demand. So the pricing was set initially fairly extensively just based on that. So the infrastructure cost, I can't speak to it very specifically because that wasn't a primary consideration. But I do know that our average cost for the infrastructure was about $9,500 per space that we put in, which is probably more expensive than most installations. There are certainly cheaper ways to do it than we chose.
Okay, and another question, Grant. Can you clarify how 325 drivers are registered for 460 available spaces? 46 available spaces, sorry. Why would people register and not use their spaces? Just a clarification.
So the registration is for access to the network. So the registration process is if I want to plug into a Disney charging station, I go to chargepoint.com, which is where all of our chargers are administered. I put in a password that Disney gives to the driver to enable the access to the space. That basically just tells our office that we're looking to approve this person, that they are in fact a Disney employee by virtue of knowing this password. Once they're approved, they're just on this list of drivers. Any driver can access any of the 46 spaces that are available at any time. It's not like there's a reserved space for each driver. If we tried to do that, our parking needs and infrastructure needs for electric charging would be through the roof. So it's a situation where the 325 drivers, only maybe 20 of them may be plugged into a space at any one time, and all the spaces are shared. There's no reserved space for any one individual person.
Okay, and third question, and I think for both we had, was have you or the other speakers considered level 1?
Yes. Again, I'm sort of the advocate, and the facilities teams with the budgets that actually are spending the money are the decision makers, and I have been advocating for some level 1 spaces, particularly in a new parking lot that we're currently building in Anaheim for an additional set of cast member spaces. I think that level 1s would be perfect there because these are going to be primarily cast members working in the park that cannot get back to their car and move it in the middle of the day. So we know it's going to be parked there for 8 or 10 hours. So why not provide a row of plugs and plug them in? If it was me making the decision, that's exactly what I would do. There's some hesitation on the part of those that would be providing the administration to kind of oversee those spaces, and I'm still trying to talk them into it. I think we may decide to go that way, maybe in conjunction with some level 2 spaces as well, so that people have a choice of whether they want to park and plug in for 8 hours or maybe plug into the level 2 if they do have the ability to get back to their car and move it in 3 or 4 hours. That would be ideal, but I haven't convinced the check writers yet of that. But yes, we are talking about that.
All right. Well, thank you for your presentation, Grant, and please stay online still. We're going to have another row of questions after my short presentation here. And I just wanted to be mindful of everybody.
Jasna,
yes.
It's Tom, and you actually asked that question of Grant and others, and I'd like to weigh in on that level 1.
Please.
So we actually are actively investigating level 1 because the last thing you want to do is have your product development engineers and your lawyers literally jockeying their cars around so that somebody else can go get a charge. So that is something that we're investigating in our future expansion with a favorable eye.
Great. Thank you, Tom. I was asking of the best because I remember seeing that in your slides. All right. So if
this is Andrew. I just have a quick input. Many parking garages already have 110 outlets in the corners, so it would be easy just to put up a sign and paint it.
Very good. Any other comment to that? All right. We'll move on, and I wanted to go over just a couple of additional points on internal employer policies and incentives, which is another document that we have been developing, collecting information to understand what else companies do beyond installing workplace charging and EVSEs at their workplaces that incentivizes, supports employees to own and operate or lease electric vehicles or plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. So as part of this grant, we have been working here at CALSTART at pulling these employer policies and incentives that encourage and support workplace charging. The research was done through, again, a set of EV initiative webinars that we conducted during the year. And then, because we found to some extent that the conversations at the webinars were not always super productive in certain instances, we went actually and had one-on-one interviews with a targeted number of employers. We had targeted initially a group of about 16 or 20, ended up getting responses from about 8 employers. This was mostly California, or California employers, yes. The other resource we used was the Amping Up California case studies that the Plug-in Collaborative had put together. And within that document, there are a number of incentives listed for the employers. So as you will see, this document, which we will very soon have up on the website and available for publication, for sharing with everybody, divides most of the incentives into 2 large groups, monetary and non-monetary incentives. So we found we were looking at what kind of monetary incentives companies have. And the largest monetary incentive, or the biggest and most common monetary incentive, is a cash incentive that companies provide to their employees. So there are a number of companies that have, let's say, $3,000 or $4,000 available for purchasing or leasing a qualified PV, and they will essentially offer it to their employees as a benefit. The other monetary incentive is the example that Grant had, that each employee for each day that they drive their vehicle, electric vehicle, plug-in electric vehicle to work, they get paid $1 an hour, $1 a day, I'm sorry, $1 for that, for using their electric vehicle. So those are both monetary types of incentives. Another type of monetary incentive is where the employer covers an EV lease of up to $240 a month. So if the vehicle is not purchased but leased. We have a very prominent case actually here in California. I'm forgetting the name of the company now. Evernote. Yes, Evernote has basically provided to a good number of their employees this EV lease for the vehicles, which then gets the employees into HOV lanes and ability to commute in HOV lanes. And they had seen that as an important incentive that would help overall the company productivity, because it would help the employees get to work faster. The next set are non-monetary incentives, supportive of plug-in electric vehicles. So these include free charging, and as you heard Tom's description or Tom's slides, saying how they went from charging for the charging, no pun intended, to free charging. Then offering preferred parking for PEVs. This is something interesting that's appearing more and more. And in a couple of cases we have read and seen that either the parking would be free or you would get preferred parking lots if you have an electric vehicle or plug-in vehicle. And then also offering PEVs in car sharing fleets so that the employees can use PEVs. This is a good incentive actually because it kind of does promote PEVs through direct experience of employees driving them within the car sharing fleet. Okay, so this, let me just move to the first. This is a document that's in draft form right now. We're reviewing it and have gotten feedback, and we'll have it published by the end of the month. It needs to be the second draft completed. So it's really going to be hot off the press. I want to just remind everybody this field of workplace charging and electric vehicles overall is ever changing, and all these documents often need to be updated. So the version you see now, hopefully we'll be able to keep updating them and refreshing them and present them on the website. So with that, I'd like to move to questions, open up the questions for all the speakers, Cynthia, myself, as well our 3 case studies here. And please type your questions in the windows that you have. We are reading them constantly and we'll try to respond. So one question that appeared a couple of times was whether at your facilities where you have workplace charging, any of the lots are ADA compliant. Could one of you address the ADA compliance issues, please?
I can. This is Grant from Disney. We actually had this come up during the discussion at Disneyland Resort. We put in those 10 employee spaces, and in doing the research, we found there's not a specific rule that says you have to reserve an electric space only for EVs, but we do have a space that we did mark as, please save this space for last for ADA access in case someone does need it. So we signed it that way, and it's pretty. The drivers are pretty good about it. They use the other 9 spaces first, and then if that's the only space left, does someone go ahead and take that 10th space? It's kind of like the extra white stall in the restroom. I know people try to avoid that, but if all else is taken and you don't have a choice, then use that space. That's how we've approached it. We haven't found anything that mandates that we leave a space specifically only for ADA vehicles. But that's California. It could be different in Ohio.
And for us at Intuit, we found that actually it depended by the location. There were some local ordinances. Obviously, there's nothing tied into the ADA, but how the Americans with Disabilities Act is interpreted is really by local ordinance, and that's where we ran into some situations. So we actually do have, most of our sites do have ADA accessible charging.
Yeah, and I will add, CalSTART has, the picture you're seeing actually on your screen is our parking lot. We did have to install ADA compliant spaces, and they are big enough for wheelchair access. So yeah, I think all new parking lots are now required to include that. So another comment that appeared also was, I think in one of the slides that BookFactory had, there was a little bit of confusion on the level 3, and what was indicated as level 3 is one of our audience members corrected that it's high power level 2, and that level 3 refers to something else often. So I just wanted to note that.
Somewhat of a follow-up question for you, Andrew, came from John Bailey. He was curious how you handle additional requests for EVSC requirements at your workplace if more and more EV owners begin working at your site, and what the limits on EVSC development are there.
What I've told employees, and this is our policy, is that we will install enough chargers to keep up with demand. So I encourage people. I've given employees test drives. Other of our employees have given them test drives. It's almost like we have enough EVs here where you can try out just about every model. And so that's the way we've left it. We also, the EV drivers know when a car is charged. So, for example, on a plug-in Prius, there's a light, and if the light's out, it's fully charged. On a Leaf, on the dashboard, there's 3 lights. If the last light, third light is solid, that's plugged in. So we have a policy, okay to unplug if somebody's already plugged in. We also have, I just wanted to mention for those that are running out of spaces, is that we have a extension cord for a level 2 charger. And so if you have too many cars there and you can't reach, you can use the extension cord to reach a 4th space.
Okay, and another question, thank you, Andrew. Another question for all of our presenters. Any stories on downtime and equipment repairs from the workplaces or both public and private uses?
So this is Grant. I can start with that one. With ChargePoint, part of our contract is for maintenance to be provided as well, and most of our units are still under warranty because they're still actually, they're about a year old now. We may have our warranties expiring soon. But up until this point, anytime we've had an issue, which has been pretty rare, we've had a couple of instances where the electrical connection was not exactly consistent, and that caused a little bit of an issue with a couple of chargers showing as inaccessible online, even though people were still able to kind of plug in. But in our case, up to now, we've been just calling ChargePoint and scheduling maintenance to come out and make the fix, which is great for us. And that's part of the reason that our install cost, I think, was probably more expensive than most. There are certainly cheaper ways to do it, as I mentioned. But having someone take care of the maintenance for us was the way we wanted to go.
So it is
Hi, this
one
is
of the
Cynthia.
things that was a challenge for us was the incumbents providers' equipment was continually going down, and we got very little response out of getting it repaired. So it was a driver for us to move to the provider we have today, which we're very happy with, have very little downtime. And actually some of our facility managers have actually been instructed how they could actually swap out the entire heads if need be or replace the cables if need be. So there's a certain amount that we can do, and there's a certain amount that we need to call the provider to help us out with. But we do have 2 systems in our portfolio that are not owned by us, that are owned by a different company. And I will tell you that as of right now, I've got one of those systems that have been down for a week, and I do not have any repair in sight at present for that particular system.
And I will mention one thing from a maintenance standpoint that hasn't been mentioned yet. But there's a park in Cincinnati that had 4 chargers, and somebody cut all 4 cords for the copper. And then the new Tesla supercharger up in Lima, Ohio, a week before it opened, somebody cut all 8 of those high-powered lines for copper before that opened. So one of the things that we did is we made sure we had cameras out back because this is the back of our building. We had cameras out back and signs, lights, and signs that video cameras are there, and we haven't had a problem with that. But just beware that that can happen and does happen.
And this is Cynthia. I just wanted to comment. I just wanted to comment about some public charging stations that were installed with some of our Recovery Act money. Some of those we've heard that have had some software problems and have experienced some downtime. One of them in the Centerville area since October. They are following up with the manufacturer and trying to get resolution. It requires a replacement part. I think the most important thing is you have to stay on top of it and get communicate directly with whichever provider needs to service the particular part.
Yes, and Cynthia, I don't know if you heard about the Air Force Museum. That was one of the projects. And I volunteer at the Air Force Museum, and they're building a fourth building, and the contractor cut the power line to the chargers, so they were down for 2 months.
Okay.
Okay, one more question we have, and I'm not sure we have an answer, is if combined solar PV and EVSE installations are cost effective, or are they done mostly for non-economic reasons? I wonder if any of our speakers would have a comment to that.
So this is Tom. We did look at an installation in one area where we are a bit challenged with the capacities of our electric room. And we found that, at least for us, it would have been 8 times the cost for half the capacity of that unit, so we decided to pass on it.
And this is Grant. We have one new building in Glendale that was just recently built that has solar panels on the roof of a new connecting parking garage. And the panels were not built specific to EV charging, but EV charging was included in that garage. And the panels currently provide 12% of the electricity, as I understand it, for both the garage and the building. So we've dabbled in solar and are getting more into it, but it's not for the purpose specifically to tie it to charging. It's just kind of an overall general effort.
Right, and I would add to that, the picture you're seeing is actually our parking lot where we do have solar, but same thing, it wasn't necessarily built to be tied in with the charging. One thing came after the other, but it was still done for economic reasons. I will add, though, that there are new models. Some companies are now having either mobile chargers that can charge from solar and then come to the vehicle and charge the vehicle. That's one solution. And then there are some smaller, much smaller systems than this where the charging and the solar are integrated, and the prices are not coming down as fast as we would like, but they are coming down. All right, with that, I think we're ready to close off. We have a couple of more questions that we will take. We've logged all the questions, and we will try and post answers to these. All the presentations and the recording of this webinar will be posted, and a link will be sent to all the people that have registered for the meeting. And we will speak with Cynthia and see if they can post this also on their website. At Clean Fuels, Ohio. So there are plenty of resources. There are plenty of websites and links for everybody to view. And with that, I just wanted to thank everybody for participating. We're very grateful we could have, that you could take away time from your busy schedules and present at this webinar. And stay tuned. We may have more webinars similar to this in the future. Thank you very much, and we will see you another time.
Have a great afternoon, all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.